Hey guys, tonight we slip into the muddy, herb-scented boots of a medieval doctor, trudging through a 14th century village where disease lurks in every shadow, and your best tools are a rusty lancet and a prayer. Picture yourself in a creaky timber hovel, the air thick with wood smoke and the faint whiff of boiled cabbage. Dawn's gray light sneaks through a cracked shutter, and you're already sweating under a cloak, wondering if that cough you heard last night was just a cold or the Black Death's opening act. Spoiler: you probably won't survive this career long, given the state of medieval hygiene. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake to the crow of a rooster, its screech cutting through the damp chill of your one-room home. The straw mattress beneath you rustles as you shift, scratching at an itch. Probably fleas, because even doctors aren't immune to the vermin infesting every corner of this village. Your home is a cluttered mix of domestic and professional. A wobbly table holding mortar and pestle, a few chipped pottery jars stuffed with dried nettles and chamomile, and an unsettlingly large jug of leeches squirming in murky water. The fireplace, still smoldering from last night, casts flickering shadows across walls plastered with crumbling daub. You splash cold water from a bucket onto your face, the shock jarring you awake. No coffee in 1340. Sadly, just a crust of rye bread and a swig of sour ale to kickstart your day. You're a physician, or as close as this muddy hamlet gets to one. Trained not at some fancy university like Bologna, but through apprenticeship with an old healer who swore by toad ashes for gout. Your first task is to check your supplies. You rummage through a sack, pulling out bundles of lavender yarrow and something you hope is rosemary but might just be a weed you grabbed in a hurry. Medieval medicine, you see, is less science and more desperate improvisation. Fact: by the 14th century, physicians relied heavily on the humoral theory, believing illness stemmed from imbalances in blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Adjust those, and you'd supposedly fix the patient. Spoiler: it's about as effective as yelling at the moon to cure a fever. You grab your satchel, heavy with tools, a knife sharp enough to scare anyone, a few bone-handled needles, and a vial of mercury you're oddly proud of, despite its tendency to make patients' teeth fall out. As you step outside, the village is stirring. A pig snuffles past, dodging a cart piled with turnips. The air smells of manure and fresh-baked bread, a weirdly comforting mix. You're not just a doctor. You're a walking pharmacy, surgeon, and occasional fortune teller, because patients expect you to predict their fate while you're poking their sores. Historians still argue whether medieval doctors were more harmful than helpful, given their obsession with bleeding and purging. Some say they saved lives. Others call them glorified butchers with herbs. You don't have time to debate. You've got a full day ahead, started with a farmer who swears his leg's been cursed by a witch. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some doctors in your time believed rubbing a patient's feet with garlic could ward off evil spirits, causing illness. No evidence it worked, but it sure made the room smell like a questionable stew. You chuckle, imagining explaining that to a modern doctor. Your cloak snags on a splintered fence as you head toward the village square, where a crowd's already gathering, shouting about a cow that's gone lame. They'll probably ask you to fix that, too, because apparently you're the village's all-purpose problem solver. You sigh, adjust your satchel, and brace for a day of blood, herbs, and the kind of blind faith in mercury that keeps you both hopeful and terrified. The sun's barely up, and you're already wondering if you should have become a blacksmith instead. The dirt path squelches under your boots as you pass the baker's hut, where a woman waves you over, her face pale. "My boy's got a fever," she whispers, like saying it louder might summon worse spirits. You nod, trying to look confident, but inside, you're running through a mental checklist. Fever could be anything: bad air, bad humors, or just bad luck. You promise to visit later, already dreading the moment you'll have to decide between a poultice and a prayer. The village is small, maybe 200 souls, but every one of them seems to have a rash, a limp, or mysterious pain they're sure is fatal. You're not just fighting disease. You're fighting fear, superstition, and the occasional angry goose that chases you down the lane. Your first stop is a miller's house, a low structure with a thatched roof leaking in 3 places. The miller, a burly man named Godwin, greets you with a scowl, pointing to his swollen ankle. "Stepped on a nail," he grumbles. You kneel, inspecting the wound, which is red and oozing, bad news in a world without antibiotics. You mutter something about balancing the humors, mostly to sound authoritative, and pull out a small clay pot of honey. Honey's a rare win in your arsenal. It's sticky, sure, but it's got natural antibacterial properties. Not that you know the science behind it. You smear it on, wrap the wound in a cleanish cloth, and tell Godwin to avoid walking for a day. He laughs, because who has time for that? As you leave, you spot a charm hanging above his door, a dried frog tied with twine. Quirky, right? Except it's not uncommon. Some villagers swear such talismans keep demons at bay. You don't argue. It's not worth the fight. Instead, you make a mental note to check your own charms later, just in case. The sun climbs higher and the village hums with life. Children shrieking, a blacksmith's hammer clanging, and somewhere a dog barking like it's personally offended. You've got a long day ahead, and the weight of your satchel feels like the weight of every patient's hope. You take a deep breath, dodge another pig, and head toward the next house, where a woman's waited with a cough that's probably nothing but could be everything. You trudge to the village's muddy streets, your boots sinking into the churned-up earth as the morning mist clings to your cloak like a needy ghost. The air smells of damp straw and something faintly sour, probably a pile of refuse someone forgot to cart away. Your satchel bounces against your hip, stuffed with herbs and that ominous vial of mercury you're still weirdly proud of, despite its habit of making patients' gums bleed. The village is awake now, a chaotic symphony of clucking hens, shouting peddlers, and the distant creak of a water wheel. You're headed to a cluster of homes where ailments are piling up faster than firewood, and every step reminds you of last night's rye bread, sitting like a stone in your stomach. Being a medieval doctor means you're part detective, part charlatan, and part miracle worker, or at least that's what the villagers expect. Your first patient is a woman named Alice, hunched in her doorway, clutching a shawl around her thin shoulders. Her face is pale, her eyes glassy, and she's coughing into a rag that's seen better days. "It's the miasma," she whispers, convinced the bad air from the nearby swamp is to blame. You nod, because argue with her would take more energy than you have. Fact, medieval medicine leaned heavily on the idea of miasma, foul air causing disease, which wasn't entirely wrong, given how often filth and sickness went hand in hand. You kneel beside her, the dirt floor cold through your hose, and press a hand to her forehead. She's burning up, but you're not sure if it's a simple fever or something nastier, like the sweating sickness that wiped out half a village last year. You dig into your satchel, pulling out a small pouch of dried elderflower. Boil this in water and drink it twice a day. You say, trying to sound like you've got this under control. Elderflower is supposed to help with fevers, but honestly, you're guessing. Most of your remedies are. You add a sprig of mint for good measure, partly because it smells nice, partly because it makes you look like you know what you're doing. Alice nods, clutching the herbs like they're a holy relic. You make a mental note to check on her tomorrow, assuming she doesn't start spitting blood or accusing you of witchcraft if she gets worse. Next up is a farmer, Wulfric, who's limping worse than yesterday. He's leaning on a stick, his face red from pain or maybe last night's ale. "My knee's swollen again," he grumbles, rolling up his trouser leg to reveal a joint the size of a small apple. You wince, not because it's gruesome, though it's not pretty, but because you know he won't like your solution. We need to bleed you, you say, pulling out a lancet that seemed more veins than a butcher's knife. Bloodletting is a go-to fix, based on a mainstream belief that draining blood rebalances the body's humors. It's about as scientific as throwing salt over your shoulder, but it's what everyone expects. Wolfert grumbles but lies down on a bench, and you tie a strip of cloth around his arm, searching for a vein that looks cooperative. As you slice, a thin stream of blood dribbles into a bowl, and you try not to think about how you'll clean this later. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some doctors use the taste of blood to diagnose diseases, believing its flavor, sweet, sour, or metallic, revealed the patient's ailment. You're not that desperate, thank God, but you can't help wondering what Wolfert's would taste like. Probably ale and regret. He groans, muttering about how his cow's milk went sour the same day his knee flared up, which he's sure is a sign of divine punishment. You don't roll your eyes, but it's a close call. The bleeding done, you bandage his arm and prescribe rest, knowing he'll ignore you and be back in the fields by noon. Historians still argue whether bloodletting did more harm than good. Some say it weakened patients already fighting infection, while others think it occasionally relieved pressure in specific cases. Either way, you're stuck with it, because saying, "I don't know," isn't an option when a whole village thinks you're one step below a saint. You pack up, leaving Wolfric with a poultice of comfort leaves, which might actually help the swelling, or at least make him feel like you're earning your fee, a loaf of bread and a half-dead chicken. As you move to the next house, a child darts past, nearly knocking you into a puddle. You curse under your breath, then catch yourself. Swearing too loudly might get you a lecture from the local priest. The kid's mother, Edith, is your next stop. She's got a rash on her arm that's been spreading for days, and she's convinced of the curse from her neighbor, who she swears stole her best hen. You inspect the red, itchy patches, wondering if it's fleas, bad water, or just her scrubbing too hard with lye soap. You mix a salve of lard and chamomile, smearing it on while muttering something vague about cooling the blood. It's not a cure, but it's soothing, and sometimes that's enough to keep people from panicking. Edith's house smells of onions and despair, with a single rushlight flickering on a table. You notice a small charm tucked into the corner, a twig wrapped in red thread, meant to ward off evil. It's a reminder that half your job is battling superstition, not just disease. You make small talk, asking about her hens still missing, and crack a light joke. Maybe the rash is your arm complaining about all that bread kneading. She chuckles, which is a win. Happy patients are less likely to accuse you of incompetence. As you leave, she presses a small egg into your hand, a payment you accept with a nod, even though it's cracked and smells questionable. The morning drags on, each house blending into the next. A child with a cough, an old man with aches, a woman who swears her toothache is because she stepped on a shadow at midnight. You're not just treating bodies, you're managing fears, and it's exhausting. Your satchel's getting lighter, but your shoulders feel heavier. You glance at the sky. Still hours until noon, and you've got a market to hit later for more herbs. For now, you trudge toward the next patient, dodging a car of turnips and wondering if you'll ever figure out which ailments are real and which are just villagers' imaginations running wild. That fever Alice had is nagging at you. Too many coughs in 1 week. You push the thought aside, but it lingers like the smell of mud on your boots. You're elbow deep in a mortar, grinding a gritty mix of dried sage and fennel seeds, the sharp, earthy scent filling your cramped workspace. The village is buzzing outside, but here in this dim corner of your hovel, it's just you, a flickering candle, and a pile of questionable herbs you're turning into today's remedies. Your hands ache from the pestle's weight, and your cloak still damp from the morning slog through muddy streets. Remember that farmer's swollen knee? Yeah, it's been one of those days. You're a medieval doctor, which means you're part alchemist, part optimist, and part lunatic, trying to make medicine from plants that might just be weeds. The air's thick with wood smoke and a faint tang of mildew, because even your apothecary is more a glorified shed than a proper shop. You pause to wipe sweat from your brow, smearing a streak of green across your forehead. The table before you is a chaos of jars and bundles, lavender for calming, yarrow for wounds, and something you're pretty sure is wormwood, though it could be that mystery plant you grabbed during a late-night forage. Fact: by the 14th century, apothecaries relied on texts like the Herbal of Pseudo-Apuleius, a mishmash of Roman and local plant lore, to guide their recipes. It's less a science, more a hopeful stab in the dark, but it's all you've got. You're crafting a tonic for that coughing woman, Alice, from earlier, hoping to soothe her fever before it turns into something you can't handle with a prayer and a poultice. You sprinkle in some crushed mint, because it smells better than the alternative, crocodile dung, which some fringe healers swear by for skin ailments. Quirky tidbit: medieval recipes occasionally call for bizarre ingredients like powdered stag antler or burnt hedgehog spines, believed to cure everything from headaches to infertility. You've never tried hedgehog, but you're not above grinding up a beetle if a patient's desperate enough. You mix the herbs with boiled water, stirring until the murky green sludge. It looks like something a frog would spit out, but you bottle it anyway, tying a scrap of cloth over the top. Presentation matters when your patients half expect you to be a wizard. The process is slow, methodical, and honestly, a bit boring, which suits your sleepy ASMR vibe perfectly. You softly, imagine you're narrating this to a crowd of insomniacs. And now, you crush the sage slowly until it's dust. You chuckle, because who has time for this in 1340? Oh, right, you do, because the alternative is facing a patient who thinks their rash is a demon's curse. You set the tonic aside and start on a salve for Wulfric's knee, mixing lard with comfrey and a pinch of ground cloves, your secret weapon for making anything smell vaguely professional. The cloves cost you a week's worth of eggs at the market, but they're worth it for placebo effect alone. Historians still argue whether herbal remedies were mostly nonsense or occasionally effective. Some plants, like willow bark, had real pain-relieving properties. Hello, early aspirin, but others, like mandrake, were more about theatrics than results. You're not sure where your sage and mint brew lands on that spectrum, but you're banking on Alice feeling better just because you showed up with a bottle. You pause to stretch, your back cracking like a snapped twig, and glance at the leech jug in the corner. Those little suckers are your backup plan if the herbs fail, but you'd rather not wrestle with them today. They're slippery, and you're still traumatized from the time one latched onto your thumb. Outside, a dog barks, and you hear the clatter of a cart, probably the baker hauling flour. You're tempted to sneak out for a fresh loaf, but you got another remedy to finish. A poultice for Edith's rash. You grab a handful of chamomile, crushing it with satisfying crunch, and mix it with honey and a splash of vinegar. The smell's sharp enough to wake a corpse, which is ironic, given how many of your patients don't make it. You smirk at the thought, joke number one. If this doesn't cure her, at least her arm will smell like a fancy salad. You wrap the mix in a clean cloth, tie it tight, and add it to your satchel, which is starting to feel like it's carrying half the forest. As you work, you can't help but think about that garlic rubbing trick from yesterday. Remember the frog charm above Godwin's door? Superstitions everywhere, and you're not immune. You got a sprig of rosemary tucked in your belt, not because it's medicinal, but because a patient once swore it kept bad spirits away. You're skeptical, but why risk it? The candle flickers, nearly out, and you replace it with a fresh one, the wax dripping onto your table like a tiny, defiant rebellion against your attempts at order. You're halfway through grinding more yarrow when a knock at the door makes you jump, scattering leaves across the floor. It's a boy, breathless, saying his sister's got a nosebleed that won't stop. You grab your satchel, muttering about how nosebleeds are never just nosebleeds in this village. You follow the boy, stepping back into the muddy chaos of the streets. The poultice for Edith is still warm in your bag, and you're already calculating how much sage you got left for Alice's next dose. The nosebleed girl, Agnes, is sitting on a stool when you arrive, blood dripping down her chin like she's auditioning for a ghost story. You pinch her nose, tilt her head forward, not back, despite what her mother insists, and press a cold cloth to her neck. Breathe through your mouth, you say, sounding calmer than you feel. Nosebleeds are usually harmless, but in a world where a cut can kill, you're taking no chances. You slip her a pinch of powdered nettle, an old trick to clot blood, and hope it works before her mother starts blaming fairies. As you leave, you crack another joke. Keep her away from the pigs. They'll think she's a feast. The mother laughs, which is a relief. She's less likely to spread rumors about your incompetence now. You're back on the path, the sun climbing higher, your satchel heavier with every stop. The village feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for the next cough or fever to spark panic. You're not just mixing herbs. You're mixing hope, fear, and a whole lot of guesswork. That tonic for Alice better work, because if her cough gets worse, you'll be out of ideas faster than you're out of candles. You trudge on, the scent of sage still clinging to your hands, wondering what fresh disaster awaits at the next house. You're standing in a cramped, smoky hovel, the air heavy with the stench of sweat and something faintly metallic. As you prepare to bleed another patient, your lancet, sharp enough to make you nervous, glints in the dim light filtering through a greasy parchment window. The patient, a weaver named Thomas, lies on a straw pallet, his face pale and his arm outstretched like he's offering it to a vampire. You're a medieval doctor, remember? Bloodletting is your bread and butter, or rather, your bread and questionable ale. The village is alive outside, children shrieking, a donkey braying. But in here, it's just you, Thomas, and the squirming leeches in a jug by your feet. That mercury vial in your satchel, the one you're weirdly proud of, stays tucked away for now. This job calls for classics: a blade, a bowl, and a strong stomach. You tie a strip of cloth around Thomas's arm, tight enough to make his veins bulge. He's complaining of headaches and a heavy heart, which could mean anything from bad humors to eating too much cabbage. Fact: bloodletting was a cornerstone of medieval medicine, rooted in the humoral theory that dominated European practice since Galen's time, aiming to drain excess blood to restore balance. You're not entirely sure it works, but it's what everyone expects, so you play along. You press the lancet to the skin, the blade biting with a soft pop, and blood trickles into a chipped clay bowl. Thomas winces but stays still, probably because he's heard stories of doctors who slip and make things worse. As the blood flows, you glance at the leech jug. Those slimy little devils are your backup plan. Leeches are easier than cutting, less risk of nicking something vital, but they're a pain to wrangle. You got a dozen, fat and wriggling, harvested from a pond last week. Quirky tidbit: some doctors believe leeches could choose the right spot to suck, as if they had a sixth sense for bad humors. You're skeptical, but you've seen weirder, like that time a patient swore licking a toad cured his warts. You decide to stick with the lancet for now, watching the bowl fill slowly. Too much, and Thomas might faint. Too little, and he'll claim you're skimping on the cure. You crack a light joke to ease the tension. Don't worry, Thomas. This blood's just making room for better humors. He forces a smile, but his eyes are fixed on a red pooling in the bowl. You've done this 100 times, but it's still unnerving. There's no manual telling you when to stop, just a gut feeling and a prayer. Historians still argue whether bloodletting helped or harmed. Some say it could lower blood pressure in rare cases, but others point out it often left patients weaker, especially if infection set in. You wipe the lancet on your sleeve, Not exactly sterile, but it's 1340 and germs are just a twinkle in some future scientist's eye. You loosen the cloth, slowing the flow, and bandage Thomas's arm with a strip of linen. He's looking woozy, so you hand him a cup of watered-down ale. Rest, you say, knowing he'll be back at his loom by sunset. You grab the leech jug just in case and head to your next patient. A baker's wife with a swollen hand. Her kitchen smells of yeast and desperation, and she's cradling her hand like it's a wounded bird. "It's throbbing," she says, showing you fingers puffy enough to rival a loaf. You suspect an infection, maybe from a burn gone bad, but you can't say that. She panic. Instead, you reach for the leeches, fishing one out with a stick. It's slick and cold, writhing like it's auditioning for a horror tale. You place the leech on her hand, and it latches on, its tiny mouth working like a grim kiss. She shudders but stays still, trusting you more than you trust yourself. You mutter something about drawing out the poison, which sounds convincing even if you're half-guessing. The leech swells, growing fat with blood, and you crack another joke. "Look at that. It's having a better meal than I am." She laughs, which is a win. Happy patients are less likely to spread rumors about your questionable skills. You add a second leech, watching it curl against her skin, and wonder if you should have stuck with herbs. That sage tonic you made earlier, remember Alice's cough? Felt safer than this, but the baker's wife demanded something strong. When the leeches drop off, bloated and lazy, you pop them back in the jug, where they'll live to suck another day. You smear her hand with a comfort salve, hoping it'll reduce the swelling, and tell her to keep it clean. Good luck with that in a village where clean means not actively covered in mud. As you leave, she offers you a small loaf, still warm, and you tuck it into your satchel next to the mercury vial and that cracked egg from yesterday. Your stomach growls, but you've got no time to eat. Another patient's waiting, a carpenter with a fever who's probably been drinking from the same stream as his pigs. You step back into the street, the sun now high, baking the mud into a crusty path. The village hums with life. A woman haggles over a basket of turnips. A child chases a goose. But there's an undercurrent of fear. Every cough, every limp, feels like a warning of worse to come. You're not just fighting disease. You're fighting the village's collective panic, armed with a lancet and a jar of leeches that might be more trouble than they're worth. You trudge toward the carpenter's house, the weight of your satchel pulling at your shoulder, and try not to think about how many bowls of blood you'll fill before the day's done. That headache Thomas had us nagging at you. Too many complaints like that lately. You push the thought aside, but it sticks like the faint metallic smell still clinging to your hands. You're weaving through the midday market, the air thick with the stench of fish sweat and something suspiciously like rotting cabbage. Stalls line the village square, their sagging awnings shading baskets of wilted greens and questionable meats swarming with flies. Your satchel's heavy with the leech jug and that warm loaf from the baker's wife. Remember her swollen hand? You're a medieval doctor, but right now, you're also a haggler, elbowing past a crowd to score ingredients for your next batch of remedies. The sun's beating down, making your cloak feel like a portable oven, and you're already regretting not grabbing a hat. The market's chaos is your battlefield, where you'll trade a half-dead chicken for mercury and hope nobody asks why your cures smell like a swamp. You sidle up to a stall run by a wiry man with a beard that looks like it's hiding secrets. He's got jars of powders and shrivel herbs, some label with runes you can't read. You're after mercury, the shiny, dangerous stuff you're weirdly obsessed with, and maybe some mandrake root if he's got it. Fact. Mercury was a medieval go-to for treating everything from skin rashes to syphilis, despite its nasty habit of poisoning patients slowly. You point to a small vial of the silvery liquid, glinting like a forbidden treasure. "How much?" you ask, holding up the chicken you got from Edith's cracked egg deal. The merchant squints, then demands 2 chickens and a copper coin. You counter with a chicken and a promise to treat his wife's cough for free. He grumbles but agrees, tossing in a handful of dried thyme as a bonus. As you pocket the mercury, you spot a woman selling what she claims is dragon's blood. Probably just tree resin, but it's a quirky tidbit that some healers swore cured fevers. You're tempted, but your satchel's already bulging, and you're not sure you trust anything labeled after a mythical creature. You move to another stall, this one piled with roots and leaves, where a toothless woman offers you mandrake for a steep price. You haggle, cracking a joke. If this doesn't cure gout, I'll eat my own cloak. She cackles, knocking a penny off, and you walk away with a gnarled root that looks like it's screaming. Mandrake's supposed to be a painkiller, but you've heard stories of patients hallucinating demons after a dose. Fun times. The market's a sensory overload, shouts, clanging pots, a pig squealing as it bolts from a butcher. You dodge a cart of turnips, nearly tripping over a child chasing a hoop. Your next stop is for honey, which you need for salves and to make your tonics less gag-worthy. The honey seller, a stout man with sticky fingers, wants a week's worth of eggs for a small pot. You're running low on barter goods, so you offer to check his son's rash later. He agrees, but only after you throw in a pinch of that pricey clove powder from your apothecary stash. Remember those fancy cloves? You wince at the loss but take the honey. Its golden glow a rare bright spot in your day. Historians still argue whether medieval markets were hotbeds of innovation or just chaotic scams. Some say they spread knowledge, with traders bringing herbs and recipes from distant lands. Others call them a mess of quackery, where desperate doctors like you bought overpriced weeds. You're leaning toward the scam theory as you pass a man selling unicorn horn powder, probably ground chalk, for a small fortune. You roll your eyes but keep moving because you got one more purchase to make, vinegar to clean wounds and mix with your herbs. The vinegar stall smells like a pickling disaster, but you trade a small pouch of lavender for a jug, hoping it's not just fermented ditch water. As you weave back through the crowd, a woman grabs your arm, her face frantic. "My boy's got boils," she says, dragging you toward a side alley. You're not thrilled about the detour. Your satchel's heavy and you're starving, but you follow. Her son's maybe 10, his neck dotted with angry red lumps. You kneel, the ground gritty under your knees, and inspect the boils. They're oozing, which is bad news in a world where infection's a death sentence. You pull out your new honey and mix it with a pinch of yarrow, smearing it on with a cleanish cloth. "Keep it covered," you say, knowing she won't. You add a quick joke to lighten the mood. "Boils this big?" He's practically growing his own turnips. She smiles barely and offers you a carrot as payment. You take it, because every little bit helps. The market's starting to thin out as the sun dips lower, casting long shadows across the square. Your satchel's now stuffed with mercury, mandrake, thyme, honey, and vinegar, but you're down a chicken and half your clothes. You're also bone-tired, your feet aching from dodging carts and pigs all morning. You think back to Thomas's bloodletting. Remember that bowl of blood? And wonder if you should have used leeches instead. The mercury in your bag feels like a ticking bomb. You know it's risky, but patients love its shiny promise. You're not sure if you're a healer or a glorified peddler. But the village doesn't care. They just want you to keep showing up. As you head back toward your hovel, a man shouts about a fresh batch of eels, and you're tempted to barter for one, just to eat something that isn't bread. But another patient's waving you down, this one with a limp and a story about a cursed foot. You sigh, adjust your satchel, and trudge over, the market's noise fading behind you. The weight of your new supplies feels like the weight of every hope pinned on you, and you're already dreading the moment you'll have to open that mercury vial. For now, though, you've got a foot to inspect and a village to keep from falling apart, one questionable cure at a time. You're trudging through the village, the afternoon sun baking the mud into cracked slabs under your boots, as whispers of plague slither through the air like a bad smell you can't shake. Your satchel's heavier now, stuffed with that shiny mercury vial honey and the screamy-looking mandrake root from the market. Remember that haggling match? The village feels tense, like it's holding its breath, and every cough or sneeze makes heads turn. You're a medieval doctor, which means you're not just fighting fevers, but the creeping dread of the Black Death, a shadow that's been haunting Europe since it tore through a few years back. Fact: the Black Death, peaking around 1347 to 1351, killed up to half of Europe's population, and its specter still lingers in every hamlet, making your job feel like juggling hot coals. A woman named Marjorie flags you down, her eyes wide with panic. "My husband got spots," she says, clutching your sleeve like it's a lifeline. You follow her to a low-roof hut, the air inside thick with the scent of straw and fear. Her husband, Ralph, is slumped on a bench, his shirt pulled up to reveal red welts on his chest. They're not the telltale buboes, those swollen, blackened lymph nodes you've heard horror stories about, but they're close enough to make your stomach lurch. You keep your face neutral, because panic spreads faster than plague. "Probably just a rash," you say, poking the spots with a stick to avoid touching them. You're not convinced, but you've got to keep Marjorie calm. You dig into your satchel, pulling out a vial of that sage and mint tonic you made for Alice's cough. Remember her? It's not exactly plague-proof, but it's what you've got. You mix it with a splash of your new vinegar, hoping the sharp tang will convince Ralph it's doing something. "Drink this twice a day," you tell him, handing over the murky liquid. He grimaces but sips, probably because he's too tired to argue. You add a poultice of yarrow and honey to his chest, muttering about drawing out the heat. It's half guesswork, half performance, but in 1340, that's half your job. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval doctors prescribe wearing a live toad around your neck to ward off plague, believing it absorbed the bad air. You're not that desperate yet, but you can't help noticing the dried frog charm above Ralph's door, just like the one at Godwin's. Superstition's your constant shadow, and you're not sure whether to fight it or lean in. You crack a joke to ease the tension. "If this tonic doesn't work, Ralph, we'll try tying a toad to your head." Marjorie snorts, but her hands are still trembling. You don't blame her. The last plague outbreak left empty houses, and ghost stories nobody wants to repeat. Historians still argue whether doctors like you slowed the plague spread or just flailed helplessly. Some say basic remedies like vinegar and herbs occasionally help hygiene. Others call your efforts a drop in a bucket of death. Either way, you're here, and Ralph's staring at you like you're his only hope. You check his pulse, fast but steady, and tell Marjorie to burn any rags he's coughed into. It's a long shot, but you've heard burning things might help, even if nobody's sure why. You leave them with a small bundle of lavender, saying it'll purify the air, mostly because it smells better than their hut. As you step back into the street, a man hurries past, muttering about a neighbor who's gone black in the armpits. Your heart skips. Buboes again. You don't run to check. Not yet. You've got another patient, a girl with fever, waiting across the village. You trudge toward her house, the sun now a heavy weight on your shoulders. The girl, Joan, is maybe 7, curled up on a straw mat, her mother hovering like a nervous hen. Her forehead's hot, her cheeks flushed, and you're praying it's just a cold. You mix another dose of your sage tonic, adding a pinch of that pricey thyme from a market. "Keep her cool," you tell the mother, knowing they'll probably wrap her in blankets instead. You sit with Joan for a while, watching her shallow breaths, and crack another joke. "She's tougher than my old master's stew. Don't worry." The mother smiles weakly, but her eyes are on Joan, not you. You leave a small pot of honey for her throat and head out, the plague rumors gnawing at your mind. Every patient feels like a gamble now. Ralph spots, Joan's fever, even Alice's lingering cough. You're carrying more than a satchel. You're carrying the village's hope, and it's heavier than that mercury vial. The street's quieter now, the afternoon fading into a golden haze, but the whispers of plague follow you like a stray dog. You've got no real defense, just herbs, vinegar, and a stubborn belief that you're making a difference. As you pass the tavern, you hear a shout, another patient, or maybe just a drunk. You keep walking because you've got one more stop before you can even think about rest. The girl's fever is stuck in your head, and you're second-guessing the time. Should you have used elderflower instead? You push the doubt down, gripping your satchel tighter. The village feels smaller today, like it's shrinking under the weight of its own fear. You're not sure if you're a healer or just a man with a bag of weeds, but you keep moving, because stopping means admitting you're as scared as everyone else. You're hunched over a rickety table in a nobleman's hall, the air heavy with the scent of beeswax candles and roasted meat, a far cry from the muddy village streets you've been trudging through. Your hands are steady, but your heart's racing as you prepare to extract a tooth from a squire who's been moaning louder than a kicked pig. Your satchel's open beside you, stuffed with that mercury vial, the mandragoot, and the last of your honey. Remember that market hall? You're a medieval doctor, and surgery, if you can call it that, is just another grim task in a day full of them. The hall's drafty, with tapestries flapping against stone walls, and the noble servants keep shooting you nervous glances. No pressure, but if this goes wrong, you're not just losing a patient. You're losing your reputation. The squire, a lanky lad named Edmund, is sprawled on a bench, clutching his jaw like it betrayed him. His tooth's gone bad, probably from chewing on grit-filled bread, and it's swollen his cheek to the size of a small apple. You got no anesthesia. Nobody does in 1340. So this is going to hurt. Fact. Medieval surgery was a brutal affair, often done without pain relief, relying on crude tools and the patient's ability to grit their teeth. You pull out a pair of iron forceps, rusted but sharp, and a small knife that's seen more action than a butcher's cleaver. Edmund's eyes widen, and you crack a joke to calm him. Don't worry, I've only lost one patient to a tooth pull this week. He doesn't laugh, but you're used to tough crowds. You pour a slug of ale down his throat, not for courage, but to dull the pain a bit. It's the best you've got, unless you count that mandragoot, which you're saving for emergencies. You lean in, the candlelight casting shadows that make your tools look even scarier, and probe his mouth. The tooth's a blackened mess, wobbling in its socket like a condemned man on a scaffold. You grip it with a forceps, and Edmund tenses, his hands clawing the bench. Breathe. You say more to yourself than him, and yank. There's a sickening crunch, a spurt of blood, and Edmund's howl echoes off the stone walls. The tooth's out, though, and you hold up like a trophy, blood dripping onto the rushes covering the floor. You pack the socket with a wad of linen soaked in vinegar, thank that market jug, and hope it doesn't fester. Infection's a real killer here, not the tooth pull, but you don't tell Edmund that. Instead, you smear a paste of honey and yarrow over the wound, muttering about keeping the humors clean. Quirky tidbit. Some medieval surgeons believe rubbing a patient's gums with a dead man's tooth could prevent infection. You're not that wild, but you're tempted to make something up about this tooth being cursed, just to keep Edmund from whining. You wrap his jaw in a cloth, tell him to avoid chewing for a day, and know he'll ignore you by supper. Historians still argue whether medieval surgery was more butchery than medicine. Some say it occasionally worked. Amputations saved lives if the wound didn't rot, while others point out the sky-high death rates from infection and shock. You're just glad Edmund didn't pass out, because carrying him to a bed would have been a nightmare. The noble Lord Robert watches from a corner, his velvet cloak screaming wealth. He's the one who summoned you here, probably because his usual physician's off treating some bishop. You're under scrutiny, and it's not just about the tooth. Mess this up, and you're back to treating pigs for lameness. You clean your tools, wiping blood on a rag that's seen better days, and crack another joke. Edmund, you're tougher than this tooth, but don't tell it I said that. He manages a weak grin, which is a win. Lord Robert tosses you a silver coin, more than you get from 10 villagers, and you pocket it, feeling briefly rich. But the moment's short-lived. A servant whispers that another squire's got a festering cut from a sparring match. You sigh, grab your satchel, and follow him to a side room where the air's sour with sweat and pus. The cut's on the squire's arm, red and oozing, and you know it's bad news. You reach for your knife again, praying you can drain it without needing to amputate. You slice carefully, letting the pus drain into a bowl, and the squire, Godric, you think, grits his teeth but doesn't scream. You're impressed. Most would have by now. You flush the wound with vinegar, wincing at the smell, and pack it with a comfort poultice. Keep it clean, you say, knowing the odds of that in a hall where dogs sleep on the floor. You're halfway through bandaging when Lord Robert pokes his head in, asking if Godric will fight tomorrow. You hedge, saying, if the stars align, which is your go-to when you're not sure. The stars, after all, are your backup excuse for everything. As you leave the hall, the weight of the coin in your pocket feels like a small victory. But the squire's cut is nagging at you. Infection's a beast you can't outrun, and you're out of ideas beyond vinegar and hope. The village waits outside, with its fevers and plague rumors. Remember Ralph's spots? And you're already dreading the next call. You step into the fading light, the air cooler now, and head toward the village, your satchel rattling with tools that feel more like weapons and curers. You're not sure if you're saving lives or just delaying the inevitable, but for now, you keep moving one bloody tooth at a time. You're squinting at a tattered parchment under the flickering light of a rush candle, its edges curling like it's trying to escape your grasp. The chart's a mess of inky lines and Latin scribbles, claiming to map the star's influence on human health. You're a medieval doctor, remember, and in 1340, the heavens are as much your guide as that mercury vial in your satchel. Yep, the one you're still weirdly proud of, despite its risks. The village is quiet now, the afternoon fading into a dusky haze. But you're holed up in your hovel, trying to decide if Mars in retrograde means you should bleed a patient or just prescribe more sage. The air smells of damp straw and the lingering whiff of that vinegar you use on Godric's cut. Remember that oozing mess? Your head spinning, not from the stars, but from the weight of a day spent dodging plague rumors and noblemen's expectations. You trace a finger over the chart, noting the moon's position in Scorpio. Fact. Medieval medicine leaned heavily on astrology, with physicians like you using planetary alignments to time treatments, believing stars influence the body's humors. A patient with fever? Better wait until Venus is ascendant. It's not just superstition. It's your job description. You're supposed to know whether Jupiter's glow means it's safe to lance a boil or if Saturn's shadow calls for a poultice. Right now, you're eyeing a farmer's wife with a persistent cough, not Alice, but her neighbor, Cecily, and wondering if the stars suggest a tonic or a prayer. You're leaning toward both, because you're running low on ideas and time. You set the chart down, rubbing your eyes, and glance at your satchel. That mandrake root from the market, remember the screamy one, is tempting, but it's risky. Mandrake's supposed to calm fevers, but too much, and Cecily might see demons dancing on her ceiling. Quirky tidbit. Some healers believe you had a harvest mandrake at midnight under a full moon, ideally while chanting to keep its spirit calm. You didn't do that. You just haggled for it. But you're half wishing you had. If only feel like you've got some control. You mix a safer bet, a tonic of elderflower and honey, spiked with a pinch of that pricey thyme. It smells like a meadow, which is more than you can say for Cecily's hut, where the air's thick with smoke and despair. You step outside, the chart tucked under your arm, and head to Cecily's. The village feels heavier now, the plague whispers from earlier Ralph spots. Joan's fever, still buzzing like flies. Cecily's waiting, her cough rattling like a broken bellows. You check the sky, more out of habit than faith, and decide the moon's good enough for treatment. Drink this, you say, handing her the tonic. She sips, grimacing, and you crack a joke. Tastes like spring, right? Or at least better than my boots. She chuckles, which is a win, but her eyes are tired, and you're not sure if it's the cough or the fear of what it might mean. You sit with her, explaining that the stars favor recovery. Total nonsense, but it sounds reassuring. Historians still argue whether astrology helped or hindered medieval medicine. Some say it gave patients confidence, a placebo effect. Others call it a distraction from real curers. Not that you have many of those. You're just trying to keep Cecily calm, because panic's worse than the cough. You check her pulse, slow but steady, and tell her to rest by the fire. She nods, clutching the tonic like it's a holy relic, and you leave, promising to return tomorrow. Her hut's charm, a bundle of twigs tied with red thread, catches your eye as you go, reminding you of that frog above Godwin's door. Superstitions everywhere, and you're not above tucking a sprig of rosemary in your belt for luck. Back on the path. The stars are starting to prick through the sky, and you're wondering if you misread that chart. Should you have bled Cecily instead? You push the thought aside, but it sticks like the mud on your boots. Your next stop is a quick check on Alice. Her cough's not worse, thank God, and you're halfway there when a boy runs up, saying his father's got a bad stomach. You sigh because bad stomach could mean anything from bad ale to bad humors. You follow him, the night air cool against your face, and crack another joke to keep yourself sane. If his stomach's worse than my cooking, we're in trouble. The boy doesn't laugh, but you're used to that by now. The father's hut is a mess, with a goat chewing something in the corner. His stomach's bloated, probably from eating moldy bread, and you prescribe a weak tea of fennel seeds. Thank that market hall again. You're not sure it'll help, but it's better than doing nothing. As you leave, the stars overhead feel like they're watching, judging your every move. You're not sure if you believe they control anything, but you check the chart again just in case. The village is settling into night. The day's chaos fading, but you're still carrying the weight of every patient's hope. Cecily's cough, Ralph's spots, that squire's tooth, they're all piling up in your mind, and the stars aren't offering any answers. You trudge on, satchel heavy, wondering if tomorrow's chart will make more sense or just add to the mess. You're trudging up a rocky path toward the monastery, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows that twist like doubts across the ground. Your satchel's heavy with the usual suspects: mercury vial, mandragroot, that dwindling pot of honey from the market. Remember that sticky barter? The air smells of pine and damp earth, a welcome change in the village's mix of manure and despair. You're a medieval doctor, but right now, you're a pilgrim of sorts, seeking the monk's wisdom to bolster your shaky remedies. The monastery looms ahead, its stone walls grim and silent, like it's judging your questionable medical skills. You're here to consult Brother Anselm, a monk who's half healer, half saint, and probably the only one who knows more about herbs than you, though he'd never admit it. The wooden gate creaks as you enter, and a novice leads you through a cloister, where monks shuffle in silent prayer. The air's thick with incense, sharp and smoky, and you're already feeling like an imposter in your mud-stained cloak. Fact: monasteries in the 14th century were often centers of medical knowledge, preserving ancient texts and growing herbs in cloister gardens, making them the closest thing to a hospital you'll find. You're hoping Anselm's got something for Cecily's cough. Remember that rattling mess, because your sage tonic's not cutting it. You find him in a herbarium, a small room lined with shelves of dried plants and dusty manuscripts. He's hunched over a mortar, grinding something green, his bald head gleaming like a polished egg. Brother Anselm, you say, bowing slightly, because monks love that stuff. He nods, barely looking up, and you explain Cecily's case. Persistent cough, fever, no spots yet. You're praying it's not plague-related. Ralph's will still haunt you. Anselm listens, then hands you a bundle of hyssop, swearing it clears the lungs better than anything. You're skeptical, but take it, because he's got a track record of miracles, or at least better guesses than yours. You pull out your star chart. Yep, the one you were squinting at last night, and ask if the moon's position matters. He snorts, which is as close to a laugh as you'll get, and says, "Gods will trump the stars, but hyssop won't hurt." You crack a joke to lighten the mood. "So, no toad necklaces today?" He doesn't smile, but his eyes crinkle, which is a win. You spend an hour with him, learning to mix hyssop with honey and a splash of holy water. Quirky tidbit. Monks often added blessed water to remedies, believing it carried divine healing power. You're not sure about the God part, but you're not above sprinkling some in if it calms patients. Anselm also gives you a recipe for a fever salve, willow bark and mint, which sounds promising, since willow's got a reputation for easing pain. You scribble on a scrap of parchment, your hand smudged with ink and herb dust. Historians still argue whether monastic medicine was a step forward or just religious window dressing. Some say monks preserve vital knowledge. Others think their reliance on prayer over practice slowed progress. You're just glad for the hyssop, because Cecily's cough is starting to sound like your last hope. As you leave, Anselm presses a small vial of rose oil into your hand, saying it's for spiritual balance. You nod, because argue with a monk is like argue with a wall, and tuck it into your satchel next to Mercury. You step back into the fading light, the monastery's bell tolling behind you, each clang feeling like a reminder of time running out. You're halfway down the path when a boy runs up panting, saying his mother's taken a turn. Fever spiked, and she's talking nonsense. It's not Cecily, thank God, but another woman, Maud, who you saw last week for a sore throat. You curse under your breath, because fevers are never good news, especially with plague rumors swirling. You follow the boy, the hyssop bundle bumping against your hip. Maud's hut is dark, the air sour with sweat and something worse. She's on a straw pallet, muttering about angels, her face flushed and slick. You kneel, pressing a hand to her forehead, hot as a forge. You mix the hyssop with honey, adding a drop of Anselm's rose oil for good measure, and spoon it into her mouth. She chokes but swallows, and you crack another joke. If angels are talking, tell them to bring better herbs. Her son doesn't laugh, but he's too scared to care. You wipe her face with a damp cloth, praying the fever breaks before it's too late. As you leave, the boy slips you a small loaf, still warm, and you tuck it next to the cracked egg from days ago. The village is settling into dusk, the air cooler but heavier, like it's carrying the weight of every fever and fear. You're not sure if Anselm's hyssop will save Maud, but it's more than you had this morning. The monastery's bell fade behind you, and you're already thinking about Cecily, Ralph, and that squire's oozing cut. Your satchel's a lifeline, but it's also a reminder of how little you really know. You trudge on, the stars starting to peek out, wondering if Brother Anselm's God or your shaky star chart. You're weaving through the village as the sun dips low, casting a golden glow over thatched roofs and muddy lanes, your cloak catching on a splintered fence as you hurry to a noble's manor. Your satchel's packed with hyssop from the monastery. Remember Brother Anselm's gift? And that ever-present Mercury, vial you're still weirdly proud of despite its dangers. You're a medieval doctor, but right now, you're a diplomat summoned to treat Lord Robert's gout, a throbbing reminder that even the rich aren't spared from pain. The manor looms ahead, its stone walls dwarfing the village hovels, and you can already hear the clink of goblets and the murmur of servants. This isn't just a house call, it's a performance, where one wrong move could cost you more than a loaf of bread. You're ushered into a hall hung with tapestries, the air thick with the scent of roasted venison and wax. Lord Robert sprawled in a carved chair, his foot propped on a stool, swollen and red like an overripe fruit. He's grumpy, which is bad news when you're dealing with a man who could have you flogged for a bad day. Fact, gout was rampant among the medieval elite, thanks to diets heavy on meat and wine, which spike uric acid levels. Though you don't know the science, just the symptoms. Fix this, he growls, pointing at his foot. You nod, trying to look like you've got a plan, and dig into your satchel for a comfort poultice, spiked with a bit of that monastery hyssop for flair. You kneel, the stone floor cold through your hose, and smear the poultice on his foot, wrapping it in linen. It's soothing, maybe, but gout's a beast, and you're half-guessing. You suggest cutting back on wine, which earns you a scowl that could curdle milk. The stars favor moderation, you say, pulling out your trusty star chart. Remember that inky mess? To sound convincing. He grumbles but doesn't argue, which is a small miracle. You crack a joke to lighten the mood. If your foot's this angry, my lord, imagine what your stomach's saying. He snorts, which is as close to a laugh as you'll get from a noble. Navigating court politics is trickier than treating the gout. Lord Robert Stewart, a weasel-faced man named Giles, hovers nearby, whispering about a rival physician who swears by powder pearls. Quirky tidbit. Some medieval doctors prescribed gemstones ground into elixirs, believing their virtue could cure anything from gout to heartbreak. You're not that fancy, you stick to herbs, but you make a mental note to watch out for Giles. He's the type to spread rumors if your poultice fails. You add a splash of rose oil from Anselm to bandage, saying it's blessed, because nobles love that nonsense. Robert nods, mollified, and you're relieved he's not asking for mercury yet. That vial's trouble, and you'd rather not poison a lord. Historians still argue whether medieval doctors treated nobles better than peasants or just charged them more. Some say wealth bought better care, access to rare herbs or monastery remedies, while others think it just meant fancier placebos. You're leaning toward the latter as you dodge Giles's questions about your training. You mutter something about studying under a great healer and hope he doesn't press. Your real training was less great and more a series of near disasters. But nobody needs to know that. You prescribe a tea of willow bark. Thank Anselm for that tip. And tell Robert to rest, knowing he'll be back to feasting by tomorrow. As you leave, Giles slips you a silver coin, but warns you to keep the lore happy. You pocket it, feeling the weight of his threat, and step into the cooling evening air. The manor's glow fade behind you. But you're not done. Another call's come in, a servant's child with a rash, back in the village. You trudge down the path, the coin clinking against that cracked egg from days ago. The child's hut is a stark contrast to the manor, all smoke and straw, with a mother wringing her hands. The rash looks like flea bites, not plague. Thank God, because Ralph's spots are still haunting you, but you smear it with honey and chamomile anyway, just to be safe. You crack another joke. This rash is just jealous of her smile. Don't worry. The mother laughs, easing her panic, and offers you a turnip as payment. You take it, because you're not too proud for vegetables, and head out, the village now cloaked in twilight. The day's been a marathon, gout, rashes, Cecily's cough, Maud's fever, and you're bone-tired. Your satchel feeling like it's carrying half the manor's expectations. You're not just a doctor. You're a tightrope walker, balancing noble egos and village fears. The stars are out now, and you glance at them, wondering if your chart's right or if you're just making up as you go. Either way, another patient's waiting, and you've got no time to rest. You're kneeling in a dim hut, the air thick with the acrid tang of sweat, and the faint shimmer of your prized mercury vial, which you're about to use on a patient who's probably regretting last week's ale. Your satchel's a mess. Hyssop from the monastery, that screamy mandrake root, and the last dregs of honey from the market. Remember that sticky barter? You're a medieval doctor, and Mercury's your risky ace, a shiny cure-all that's as likely to kill as heal. The village is settling into evening, the hum of daytime fading to cricket chirps and the occasional dog bark. You're here for a weaver named Hugh, whose skin's gone splotchy and whose breath smells like he gargled ditch water. The locals swear by Mercury, and you're hoping it lives up to the hype because your herbs are running low and so is your patience. Hugh sprawled on a straw mat, his eyes dull as he describes a burning in his joints. You suspected something chronic, maybe arthritis, though you don't have a word for it, but the villagers want drama, so you pull out the mercury. Fact: mercury was used in the 14th century for everything from skin diseases to leprosy, despite its toxicity causing tremors, tooth loss, and worse. You tip a few drops into a clay cup, mixing it with ale to mask the metallic tang. Drink slowly, you say, handing it to Hugh, who eyes it like it's a potion from a fairy tale. You're not sure if it'll help or send him shaking like a leaf, but it's what he's paid for, a half-loaf and a promise to weave you a scarf. You watch him sip, your stomach nodding. Mercury's a gamble. You've seen it clear rashes, but also make a patient's hair fall out. You crack a joke to ease the tension. If this doesn't fix you, Hugh, you'll glow like the moon. He chuckles, but his hands are trembling already, and you're not sure if it's nerves or the mercury kicking in. You add a poultice of comfort to his joints, mostly for show, and tell him to rest. Fat chance, since he's got a loom to work tomorrow. Quirky tidbit: some medieval doctors believe mercury could purge bad humors by making patients sweat or salivate excessively. You're not sold on the logic, but when Hugh starts sweating, you take it as a good sign, or at least not a disaster. Historians still argue whether mercury did more harm than good. Some say it occasionally worked for skin conditions, maybe by killing bacteria. Others call it poison peddled by desperate healers. You're leaning toward the poison side as you watch Hugh's face flush, but you keep that to yourself. You're already thinking about your next patient, a child with a cough, not Cecily, thank God, but another kid, which means more worried parents. You pack up, leaving Hugh with a warning to avoid the alehouse, knowing he'll be there by nightfall. The mercury vial feels heavier in your satchel, like it's judging you for using it. Outside, the village is dark, save for the flicker of rushlights and windows. You head to the child's hut, dodging a stray goat that's decided the path is its bed. The kid, a boy named What, is coughing like he's trying to expel a demon. His mother's hovering, wringing a rag, and you kneel beside him, the straw floor pricking your knees. You're out of hyssop. Anselm's gift didn't last long, so you mix a weak tea of fennel seeds and honey, the last of your market haul. Sip this, you tell What, holding the cup to his lips. His cough eases, or maybe that's wishful thinking. You crack another joke. Keep coughing like that, and you'll scare the pigs away. His mother smiles, but her eyes are on What, not you. You check his forehead, warm, but not as bad as Maud's fever, and tell her to keep him by the fire. There's a charm above the door, a bundle of twigs like the ones at Godwin's and Ralph's. And you're starting to wonder if the village has a twig-tying club. Superstition's your shadow, and you're not above tucking that rosemary sprig tighter in your belt. As you leave, the mother offers you a small apple, bruised but edible, and you tuck it next to that cracked egg from days ago. The night's cool now, the stars bright, and you're thinking about Hugh's mercury dose. Was it too much? You push the doubt down, but it sticks like the metallic aftertaste on your tongue from just handling the stuff. You're halfway to your hovel when a man shouts your name, a baker with a limp, claiming his foot's worse since you bled him last week. You sigh, because it's always something, and follow him, your satchel rattling with the weight of your choices. The village feels smaller tonight, every hut hiding a cough or a fear. You're not just a doctor, you're a juggler, balancing mercury, herbs, and the village's trust. Hugh's sweaty face and What's cough are piling up in your mind, and you're wondering if that star chart from last night, remember Scorpio's moon, might have been wrong. You trudge on, the mercury vial a cold reminder that sometimes your cures are as dangerous as the diseases. You're standing in a smoky hut, the evening air heavy with the scent of tallow and the faint jingle of charms dangling from the rafters. Your satchel slung over your shoulder, packed with that dwindling hyssop, the ominous mercury vial, and the last scraps of honey. Remember that market barter? You're a medieval doctor. But tonight, you're part priest, part magician, chanting over a patient who's convinced their fever's a curse. The village is hushed, save for the occasional owl hoot and the crackle of a fire. You're here for Agnes, the baker's sister, whose fever spiked after she crossed the witch at the well. Your job's not just to treat her, but to convince her she's not doomed, which is harder than dodging plague rumors. Remember Ralph's spots? Agnes lies on a straw pallet, her face flushed, muttering about a black cat that stared at her too long. You kneel, the floor gritty under your knees, and check her pulse, fast, but not deadly. Fact. Medieval medicine often blended superstition with treatment, with charms and prayers prescribed alongside herbs, especially for ailments blamed on spirits or curses. You pull out a sprig of rosemary, yep, the one still tucked in your belt for luck, and wave it over her, chanting a Latin phrase you half remember from your apprentice days. It's nonsense, but it sounds holy, and Agnes's eyes widen like you're banishing demons. You mix a tea of elderflower and fennel, hoping it'll break the fever, and slip in a drop of Brother Anselm's rose oil for extra flair. You hand her the tea, saying, "Drink this to cleanse the spirit." It's mostly for the fever, but framing it as anti-witchcraft sells it better. You tie a small bundle of lavender above her bed, calling it a ward against evil. Quirky tidbit. Some medieval healers use amulets made of animal bones or inscribed stones, believing they repel malevolent forces. You're not that extra, but you're not above a lavender charm to keep Agnes calm. You crack a joke. If that cat comes back, tell her I got worse herbs. She smiles weakly, which is progress, and you feel a flicker of hope that this is just a fever, not the plague creeping in. Historians still argue whether charms and prayers were a psychological crutch or a total waste of time. Some say they soothed patients, boosting recovery through belief. Others call them a distraction from real medicine. Not that you've got much of that. You're just glad Agnes is sipping the tea and not accusing you of witchcraft instead. You check her forehead again, still hot, and tell her to rest, knowing she'll probably be kneading dough by dawn. As you pack up, you notice a twig charm by the door, like the ones at Godwin's and Cecily's. This village's obsession with twigs is starting to feel like a secret society you're not invited to. You step outside, the night air cool against your face, and hear a shout from across the village. Another patient, or maybe just a drunk. You're bone tired, but you head toward the noise, because stopping isn't an option. It's a woman named Beatrice, claiming her stomach's tied in knots from a neighbor's curse. You sigh, because curses are the village's favorite diagnosis after bad air. Her hut smells of onions and despair, and you find her clutching her belly, eyes wild. You mix a weak fennel tea, your go-to for stomach issues, and add a quick prayer, waving that rosemary sprig again for effect. This'll loosen the knots. You say, hoping it's just bad food and not something worse. You crack another joke. If this doesn't work, we'll blame the neighbor's cow. She laughs, and you're grateful, because a calm patient's less likely to start a witch hunt. You leave Beatrice with a lavender sprig and head back into the night, the stars bright overhead. You're thinking about Agnes's fever, Hugh's mercury dose, and that star chart you squinted at. Remember Scorpio's moon? Did it even matter? Your chants and charms are as much for you as for them, a way to feel like you're not just throwing herbs at a void. The village feels like it's shrinking, every hut hiding a curse or a cough. Your satchel's lighter now, but your shoulders are heavy with the weight of belief, yours and theirs. You're not sure if you're a healer or a storyteller, but you keep moving one charm at a time, hoping the next patient doesn't blame you for the black cat stare. You're slumped on a wobbly stool in the village tavern, the air thick with a yeasty tang of ale and the low hum of gossip swirling around you like flies. Your satchel's at your feet, still holding that mercury vial and the last scraps of hyssop. Remember Brother Anselm's gift? You're a medieval doctor. But right now, you're just another tired soul nursing a cup of watered-down ale, trading stories with a handful of healers who smell as herbal as you do. The tavern's dim, lit by flickering rushlights, and the wooden table sticky with spilled drinks and secrets. It's late, the village settling into a restless quiet. But here, the day's chaos lingers in every whispered tale of cures gone right or wrong. You're here to compare notes, maybe learn something, or at least drown out the memory of Agnes's feverish mutterings about witches. Remember her lavender charm? The healer across from you, a grizzled man named Oswin with a beard like tangled brambles, is ranting about a patient who swore goat urine cured his gout. You raise an eyebrow, sipping your ale, and count with your own tale the mandragroot. Yep, that screamy one from the market that made a patient see dancing fairies. Fact: medieval healers often share knowledge in informal gatherings like this, blending practical tips with wild folklore, creating a patchwork of medicine that was equal parts genius and lunacy. Oswin leans in, his breath sour, and swears by a poultice of nettles for fevers. You're skeptical, but jot it down mentally, because you're running low on ideas for Cecily's cough. A woman named Hilda, another healer with hands stained green from herbs, chimes in about a new remedy: crushed snails for wounds. Quirky tidbit: snail slime was a real medieval treatment, thought to cool hot wounds, though you're pretty sure it just made things slimy. You crack a joke to keep things light. Snails, huh? Next, you'll say slugs fix broken hearts. The table laughs, and you feel a flicker of camaraderie, rare in a job where everyone's quick to blame you for a bad outcome. You share your hyssop recipe from the monastery, leaving out the holy water part. Oswin's not the religious type, and he nods impressed, or maybe just drunk. Historians still argue whether these tavern talks advance medicine or just spread bad ideas faster. Some say they sparked innovation, with healers swapping rare plant knowledge. Others think they cemented quackery, like the snail craze. You're not sure where you stand, but when Hilda mentions a fever tonic using willow bark, you perk up. Brother Anselm swore by that. 2. You're about to ask for details when a man stumbles in, shouting about a child who's collapsed. The table goes quiet, and you grab your satchel, the ale forgotten. It's not your patient, but you follow anyway, because that's the job. Never off duty, never out of fray. The child's in a hut across the village, a girl named Ida, pale and shivering on a straw mat. Her father's pacing, muttering about bad air, and you kneel, checking her pulse, weak but there. You mix a quick tea of fennel and honey, the last of your market stash, and spoon it into her mouth. She's burning up, and you're praying it's not plague. Ralph spots and Maud's fever is still haunting you. You crack another joke, mostly for father. She's tougher than my ale. Don't worry. He doesn't laugh, but he stops pacing, which is something. You add a compress of damp cloth to her forehead, wishing you had more willow bark or even Hilda's snails. You stay longer than you should, watching Ida's breathing, the tavern's warmth fading from your bones. The father offers you a small coin, but you wave it off. You're not heartless, and besides, you've got that silver from Lord Robert. As you step into the night, the air's sharp, cutting through your cloak. The tavern's laughter echoes behind you, but it feels distant, like it belongs to someone else's life. You're thinking about Oswin's nettle poultice and Hilda's snails, wondering if you're all just guessing in the dark. Ida's fever, Agnes's curse. Hugh's mercury dose. They're piling up, and your satchel feels lighter than your conscience. You trudge toward your hovel, the stars overhead mocking your doubts, and brace for whatever the night throws at you next. You're racing to the village under a moonlit sky, your boots slipping on damp cobblestones as a frantic mother's cry echoes in your ears. Your satchel bangs against your hip, still holding that mercury vial, a pinch of hyssop, and the faint hope you got something left to help. You're a medieval doctor, but right now, you're a lifeline summoned in the dead of night for a child's fever that's got the whole family praying. The village is dark, save for a flicker of rushlights in a few windows, and the air's sharp with the chill of late spring. You're thinking of Ida's shivering form from the tavern talk. Remember that rush fennel tea? And praying this isn't another plague case. Ralph's spots and Maud's fever are still gnawing at you, and the night feels like it's holding its breath. You reach the hut, a low, smoky space where a girl named Lita, maybe 6, lies on a straw pallet, her face flushed and her breathing shallow. Her mother, Ellen, is wringing her hands, muttering about a bad wind that swept through the village. You kneel, the floor cold and gritty, and press a hand to Lita's forehead, hot as a blacksmith's forge. Fact: fevers were a leading cause of death in the 14th century, often from infections we'd now treat with antibiotics, but you're stuck with herbs and guesswork. You dig into your satchel, cursing the empty honey pot, and pull out the last of your fennel seeds. You mix a weak tea with water from Ellen's bucket, hoping it's not straight from the stream where the pigs drink. You spoon the tea into Lita's mouth, her lips barely moving, and add a damp cloth to her brow. Keep her cool, you tell Ellen, knowing she'll probably pile on blankets instead. You're out of hyssop. Brother Anselm's gift is long gone. So you reach for that rosemary sprig in your belt, waving it over Lita with a muttered prayer. It's not medicine, but it calms Ellen, who's clutching a twig charm like the ones at Godwin's and Agnes's doors. Quirky tidbit. Some villagers believe tying a red thread around a feverish child's wrist could bind the illness. You don't buy it, but you tie a scrap of cloth around Lita's wrist anyway, because hope's half your job. You crack a joke to ease attention. If this fever's a wind, we'll tie it down with more than thread. Ellen forces a smile, her eyes glued to Lita. Historians still argue whether medieval doctors like you saved lives or just comforted the dying. Some say your herbs and prayers gave patients a fighting chance. Others call your efforts futile against rampant infections. You're leaning toward futile as you watch Lita's chest rise and fall. Each breath a gamble. You're tempted to use a mercury. Hugh's sweaty face flashes in your mind, but it's too risky for a child. Instead, you sprinkle a pinch of dried lavender from your satchel over a pallet, calling it a purifying charm. It's nonsense, but Ellen nods, clinging to every word. You stay longer than you should, watching Lita, because leaving feels like abandoning her. As you finally step outside, the moon's high, casting a silver glow over the village. A dog barks, and you hear a distant shout. Another emergency, or just a tavern spilling out. You're exhausted. Your satchel lighter, but your heart heavier. You start toward your hovel, but a man intercepts you, his face pale. "My wife's coughing blood," he says, and your stomach drops. Coughing blood's never good, and with plague rumors still swirling. Remember Cecily's rattle? You're dreading what you'll find. You follow him, the night air biting your face, and crack another joke to keep yourself steady. If I survive this night, I'm charging the moon for overtime. He doesn't laugh, and you don't blame him. The wife, named Sybil, is propped against a wall, her cough wet and ragged. You check her mouth. No blood. Thank God, just a trick of the light. But her fever's high, and you're out of fennel. You mix a tea of whatever's left, some wilted yarrow and a prayer, and tell her to sip slowly. You're running on fumes now, your hand shaking as you tie another red thread around her wrist for luck. The hut's charm, Another twig bundle sways above the door, and you're starting to think the village's twig obsession is mocking you. You leave Sybil the warning to rest, knowing she won't, and step back into the night, the moon watching like it knows something you don't. Lita's fever, Sybil's cough, and the weight of every patient you've seen today are piling up, and you're not sure if you're saving anyone or just delaying the inevitable. You're slumped against the wall of your hovel, the moonlight spilling through a cracked shutter, casting jagged shadows across the cluttered table where your empty satchel lies. The mercury vial's still there, glinting like a guilty secret, but the hyssop, honey, and fennel are gone, used up on Lita's fever and Sybil's cough just hours ago. You're a medieval doctor, but right now, you're just a man staring at a dying candle, the weight of the day pressing on you like a millstone. The village is silent, save for the occasional creak of a cart or a distant dog's bark, but your mind's loud with doubts about Lita's shallow breaths, Hugh's risky mercury dose, and that ever-present plague shadow. The stars outside feel like they're judging you, and you're wondering if that chart you squinted at, Scorpio's moon, remember, was just a cruel joke. You shift on your stool, the straw beneath you rustling, and stare at the leech jug in the corner, its occupant still squirming from yesterday's bloodletting. Your hands smell of yarrow and despair, and your cloak stiff with mud from trudging between huts. Fact: medieval doctors often worked until exhaustion, with no formal system to track patients or outcomes, leaving you to carry every success and failure in your head. Lita's fever is the loudest memory tonight. Her mother's terrified eyes, that red thread you tied for luck. You're not sure if it's a fever or your own fear, but you keep seeing Ralph's spots, Maud's delirium, and Cecily's rattling cough, each one a thread in a tapestry of doubt. You light a fresh candle, its flame weak but stubborn, and pull out your star chart, its ink smudged from too many anxious fingers. Did you misread it? Should you have bled Lita instead of dosing her with fennel? Quirky tidbit. Some medieval doctors believe moonlight could amplify a remedy's power, especially for fevers. You're too tired to test that theory, but you glance at the moon through the shutter, half hoping it'll whisper an answer. It doesn't, of course, and you're left with the same question that's haunted you all day. Are you helping or just pretending? You crack a joke to yourself, a reflex to keep the darkness at bay. If the stars don't know, I'm not asking the leeches. It's not funny, but it's all you've got. Historians still argue whether doubt was a doctor's constant companion in your time. Some say it drove innovation, pushing healers to question old methods. Others think it paralyzed them, leaving patients to fate. You're feeling the paralyzed side tonight, your mind replaying every choice. Mercury for Hugh, hyssop for Maud, charms for Agnes. Did any of it matter? You stand, stretching your aching back, and rummage through your shelves for something to soothe your own nerves. A pinch of lavender, maybe, or a swig of that sour ale you keep for emergencies. The village is counting on you, but you're counting on luck, and it's running thin. You step outside, the night air sharp against your face, and look at the stars again. They're beautiful but useless, offering no clarity on Lita's fever or Sybil's cough. You think of Brother Anselm's rose oil, Lord Robert's gout, and that tavern talk with Oswin's nettle poultice. Snippets of a day that feels like a lifetime. You're not sure if you're a healer or a fraud, but you know you'll be back out there tomorrow, satchel in hand, chasing hope through the mud. For now, though, you let the quiet sink in, the village's weight settling into something softer, like a blanket you're too tired to shrug off. The world outside your hovel fades, the moonlight softening into a gentle glow, as if the stars themselves are dimming to let you rest. Your satchel sits empty, its contents scattered across a village that's now sleeping. Each hut holding a story you've touched, Lita's red thread, Hugh's trembling hands, Agnes's whispered prayers. The air grows still, the cricket chirps slowing, blending with the faint hum of a distant stream. You're not just a doctor anymore. You're part of the night, your doubts dissolving into the cool, quiet, dark. Let the worries slip, like herbs falling from your fingers, and sink into the calm, where the village's fears can't follow. The stars are silent, but they're kind, watching over you as you drift, carried by the rhythm of a world winding down. Sleep now, wrapped in the hush, and let tomorrow's battles wait.